Every good buck that we take is a trophy. We want to display it, but we don't always have the room or the money for a full taxidermy mount. Plaque mounting your own is a pretty fun, easy, and inexpensive project. Here's how I do it with just a few supplies from Van Dyke's Taxidermy. A form, some epoxy putty, a decent piece of leather, and a good quality wood plaque. Clean your skull plate as much as possible and then let it dry. Then you want to take either a Dremel or something else to get the rest of the flesh off. You want it to fit tight against the form. I do this by using a handsaw and then sometimes a Dremel in order to get it so it's snug. Start mounting the rack to the form by drilling 2 holes in the skull plate. I prefer to do it at 2 different angles, give it some extra stability. I also like to take a small piece of epoxy putty, mix it up, and then put it in between the form and the skull plate. I didn't always do this part, but once that epoxy is dry, this whole form and antler will be just completely rock solid. Once you're satisfied with how the skull plate fits onto the form, go ahead and use 2 sheetrock screws to attach them. Want to make sure that the screws are long enough to reach the plywood, but not too long so that they stick out in the back. Use any remaining epoxy putty to fill in any voids that you've got. Mix up a new batch of epoxy putty, probably less than you think you'll need. You can always make more and it tends to go a long way. Then start filling in any voids that you've got and try and get everything to the level of the form around the skull plate. You'll get the hang of it. You can kind of stick a little bit to your fingers. You'll figure out how to just fit it into all of those voids and cracks. Continue applying putty until you like the general appearance. You'll want to fill it in so that it looks like it's all one form. Major bumps or ridges can show through the leather, so you want to do your best to kind of fill it in so you like how it looks now. Once you've got as much epoxy putty on your form as you think you need, then you really just need to smooth it out. I use a little bit of water with latex gloves, and it's amazing how smooth you can get it just by kind of reworking that as it dries. I use a tiny screwdriver right at the antler bases to make sure that I can fit the leather underneath those antlers. Once dry, I give it a final sanding just to make sure it's completely smooth before I start the next step. I use a piece of leather that's just slightly larger than the walnut plaque that it's going to be mounted on. It gives me enough excess so that I have plenty to work with. I start by marking the leather lightly with a small screwdriver, then making 2 diagonal cuts to the base of the antlers from the top. This whole step is a little more of an art than a science. I guess the rule of thumb I follow here is try and cut less than you think you might need. You can always cut a little deeper or cut a little more. If you cut too much, then you'll have to start over with another piece of leather. After making those first 2 cuts, I lay it back on the form, then I take that little screwdriver and I make a few marks underneath the antlers just to give me a guide so that I know where to cut the 2 holes that I'm going to use for wrapping around the base of those antlers. After making those cuts, flip it over and start getting ready to staple. I staple starting at the top, right in the center, and then work my way down both sides, stretching slightly as I go. The key to working with this leather, in my opinion, is stretching it some so you get out the wrinkles, but not too much so that you still have the ability to make adjustments. Then pull the leather snug around the bottom and start there. So center the bottom and then start working your way up the same way you did from the top down. As you work your way up, continue to stretch the leather just enough to get the wrinkles out, but not so much that it's overstretched. You may need to cut one more time the piece towards the top so that you get a nice angled cover for your side, and then stretch that towards the top and then pull it around and staple it. Then do the same with the other side. Work your way from the bottom up, pull it up around the base, and staple it up on the back. If you like how it looks, flip it over and just cut off any excess leather that you've got in between the staples. All that's left is mounting the form to the actual plaque itself. Use painter's tape. I'll mark exactly where I want it on the plaque. Mark and then drill 3 holes for attaching the form to the plaque, and 1 angled hole on the back centered that doesn't go all the way through for hanging onto the wall. Make sure your screws are long enough to reach the plywood, but not so long that they'll stick through the leather. Finally, clean it and use a Sharpie to add the location and the year to the back. Display in a prominent spot in your house and start looking forward to next year's season. Thanks for watching.